Hello, fellow weirdos. I'm Andy Negative, and today I'm going to tell you how to make your guitar riffs sound huge. All right, weirdos, before we jump in, please take a second to just obliterate that like button for the YouTube algorithm. In this video, I'm going to show you 3 techniques to making your guitars sound gigantic, and you're going to want to stick around to the end because I'm also going to tell you my #1 secret trick that I use every single time to get big sounding guitar riffs. But before we jump in, I want to take 1 second to say thank you to the sponsors of this video, my wonderful community over on Patreon, the Weirdo Cult. They're wonderful people and they've been helping to support me through this crazy time. If you want to help support me further, I have a Patreon that you can go join if you want to. All right, so we're going to jump into Studio One and I'm going to show you several techniques that I use to get big sounding guitars. I'm using all my own music for these examples, so you can check down below for links to go check out my tunes on Spotify or whatever if you want to hear the full versions. So let's jump into the DAW and let's do the thing. The minimalist approach. So for this approach, it's very pared down. You start off with the first guitar playing the riff through a fairly distorted amplifier. As you can see, it's running through a Marshall style amplifier. I love this as my kind of like main guitar starting position. I love the way that this amp sounds. It's really good. We've got a little bit of it cleaned up through a tube screamer and then running through with these settings through a 412. And it's kind of my go-to distorted guitar tone. Very nice and mid-rangey, which I love. Then we're going to double that with a second guitar. Now this guitar is going to be played an octave up and it's going to be played through a clean amp. As you can see here, we're running through a Vox style amplifier. There's it's doing the jump to get a little bit more gain out of it, but for the most part, it's a very clean sound so that we get a lot of the clarity and a lot of the high end, which is going to help to add definition to the notes of the riff when you hear them. Then we're going to pan both of those hard left and hard right to take up a lot of space in the sonic field. Next we have our bass, which is playing the exact same thing as the riff, but it's an octave lower than the first guitar. It's a jazz bass that's being played through an Ampeg fridge. Looks like this. I try to push a bunch of the high end in this thing and make sure there's a bunch of gain. I like to put gain on the bass. Not a ton of gain, but definitely enough gain to make it stand out a little bit. And then it's probably got a little bit of compression on it, a little bit of EQing, nothing crazy. And then what I'll do is I have that running through this width channel, just to add a little bit of low end, take up a little bit more space in the mix. I have a whole video where I go over how I do this on my channel, which you can go check out so you can see kind of how I do my bass width trick, but just so you know kind of my approach to doing things. So in this example, you basically have 3 instruments that are playing a full 3-octave stack. You've got the bass on the lower octave playing the riff, you've got a guitar in the middle octave playing the riff, and you've got a guitar in the top octave playing the riff, and they're all playing it together. And then when we add all of those elements together with the drums, we get this. And that's it for the minimalist approach. It's very simply just 2 guitars, a bass, and some drums. Well, I love simple. Simple is good. Keep it simple, stupid is kind of my approach to music in a lot of cases. So yeah, easy peasy, lemon squeezy. The mediumalist approach. So to start off, we're going to play the riff through a distorted amp. As you can see, it's my standard go-to Marshall amp. Absolutely love this mid-rangey sound. It is the best. Then we're going to double that through a cleaner amp. As you can see, it's that same Vox amp that I really enjoy. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. We're going to pan both of those hard left and hard right. So you can see that adds a lot of width, which is really nice. Then we're going to triple that guitar through a fairly distorted amp. As you can see, it's very mid-ranged out. I cut a lot of the high and low out, so it's basically just taking up a little bit of mid-range to fill out some space. And we're going to leave that in the center, put them all together. Then we bring in the bass. In this case, same as usual, I'm using a jazz bass, and it's running through an Ampeg amp sim. As you can hear in this example, I didn't just double the guitar riff with the bass. I made it do something a little bit differently. I wanted it to come in as an accent for the accented notes in the guitar riff. So when you hear them together, the bass is just coming in to accent those low bottom notes of the riff that are kind of droning on through the course of the riff. And then we bring in the drums. It sounds like this all together. In this example, I really like how the guitars are slightly out of tune with each other at certain points. It kind of gives that vintagey kind of early 2000s vibe to the guitars, which I think is not heard as much anymore, but I really like it. This is cool because it takes up as much sonic space with the riff as possible while having the support instruments behind it carrying the guitar parts forward. A little more complicated than the minimalist thing, but not as complicated as the one that we're about to do. The maximalist approach. In this example, we're going to use a whole lot of techniques and a whole lot of stuff to make the guitar riff sound about as big as possible. And it all starts very simply with the guitar riff playing on its own, centered in the track. The guitar amp that I'm using is very mid-rangey. As you can see, there's a huge boost in the mid-range and not as much high and low, and that's to try to like really narrow it in and make it like a little focus thing. I was kind of going for a TV radio kind of vibe, but without being like too over the top about it. There's also a bit of a phaser on here, as you can see, which is something we haven't really seen before, and that's just to give it a little bit of like wavery sound, the same that kind of analog vibe that I was going for in this instance. Then we're going to play the track again. So you can see I got rid of the phaser. This is the same tone as the previous guitar amp. It's just phaserless, so that it doesn't have that weird phasey effect that we wanted. And that's just going to be running down the center. Then we're going to double that riff again, only this time we're going to play it an octave up higher. I'm pretty sure for this one I actually just put a capo on the fretboard because it's got those like open notes, so I needed it to be capoed. But any way of playing the octave is good. When you put those two together and then run them through a bunch of delay, like you're hearing, you get this. As you can hear, the takes aren't perfectly in tune with each other and aren't perfectly played, but they're very close. And I think that's something that I do a lot with guitars that adds a little bit of humanity to my music, and I am a fan of, but you can kind of do whatever you want. Anyway, so that's running through a guitar delay here. You can see this is the delay that I'm using. It's just a quarter note delay that adds a bit of space to the riff. Next, we're going to add some rhythm guitars. This rhythm guitar is just playing the chord progression that goes underneath it. As you can see, this is going through that Vox amp that I like, but I am using the Tube Screamer here to push it a little harder and make it a little more distorted than I normally would for one of my rhythm guitars. Then we're going to double that rhythm track using my Marshall amp that I really like very much. It seems like, but I'm using a bit of a smaller speaker cabinet on this one. I wanted it to be a little more throaty, I think, so that's kind of what I got. And then these were actually, in this instance, only panned to about halfway left and right as opposed to far left and right, which is interesting. That's not a usual approach that I take, but it's cool to see that that's what I've done. So when I put all three of those guitars together, we get this. Then we have the bass coming in right here. As you can see in this example, I'm using a way more distorted bass sound, but I think it makes it poke out a little bit more from the guitars, which was, I think, necessary in this example. The bass is also just playing the root notes of the rhythm guitar and following along that way. And then finally, when we add in the drum track, we get this. And that's the maximalist approach to how I would make my guitar riffs sound gigantic. Now for my secret weapon when it comes to making guitar riffs sound huge. And between the minimalist approach, the mediumalist approach, and the maximalist approach, I always have the same kind of secret, special attack. Well, you know how Goku's got the Spirit Bomb and Vegeta's got the Final Flash, and it's like it's their unique like individual attacks that they have to themselves. Well, I have my own individual attack to myself, and that is the drums. I know. You're probably like, oh, there's got to be something more than that, but it's not really, because what really makes a riff sound big is that all of the instruments are working together in tandem to support the guitar riff. So if you want a guitar riff that sounds gigantic, you need to have all the instruments supporting that guitar riff. So in an example with like the Ninja Turtles, if you listen to the riff, the kick and the snare are accenting the riff. They're playing in the same kind of pattern as the guitar riff. This supports the riff and makes it stand out even more. So when you've got all the instruments playing together, you've got this kind of large, wide, 3-octave thing that's also having a rhythmic attack that's hitting in a certain way. When you listen to Life's a Joke, the kick drum is accenting those low drony notes that I was talking about that the bass is supporting. So that kind of drives the riff forward some more. And then with Not Advertiser Friendly, as you can see, the drum's playing more of a straightforward kind of rhythm, but because of the fact that you've got the rhythm guitars that are moving in that same straightforward rhythm, and then the guitar riff playing over top of it that's got that kind of bouncy hammer-on pull-off thing that I'm doing, it drives the riff forward. So when it comes down to making your guitar riffs sound huge, it doesn't matter how many recording tricks that you use or what kind of mixing tricks or what kind of plugins you use. If your originally written riff with all of the instruments together doesn't work in tandem. So in order to get the biggest guitar riff that you could possibly ever get, you need to take a step back to the very writing stages and make sure that every instrument you're using is working in tandem with that guitar riff to make it stand out as a unique musical moment. And then you can have the instruments do other things later in the songs to pull the guitar back, because as the instruments are doing different things, it pulls focus from the guitar and allows it the focus to be elsewhere. So have the drums follow the rhythm of the vocal, have the bass do a bass solo, something just changing around what the support instruments are doing is going to change the focus and thus change the dynamic scope of your guitar riffs or whatever section of a song you want to be working on. And that is it for my 3 techniques for making your guitar riffs just sound huge. Let me know down below if you think that these tricks are great or if you think that they're dumb and that you know better how to make guitar riffs sound huge. And let me know maybe what your favorite technique is that you use to make your guitars sound gigantic. If you found this video insightful, informative, or even just a little bit entertaining, please obliterate that like button for the YouTube algorithm and subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. You should just do it. I'd like to take 1 minute to just say thank you to my wonderful community over on Patreon, the Weirdo Cult. They have been helping to support me through this crazy content creator lifestyle thing that I'm doing and help me to afford the coffee necessary to do it. They're the best people ever, and I love them so much. If you would like to support me in my creative endeavors further, please consider joining the Weirdo Cult over on Patreon. My community gets early access to my content, exclusive music that you can't get anywhere else, and they have their names included at the ends of all my videos, which you'll see immediately following this. I'm Andy Negative, and I'll see you guys on the other side. Bye! Entire world has been brought to you in part